Hi everyone. Today I wanted to discuss another variation in the King's Indian defense. The last video I did on YouTube was about the Everbog variation for black against the King's Indian, with playing the King's Indian against the Everbog from white. And today we're going to have a look at the Saemisch system. So the Saemisch this system of course kicks off with d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, and now f3. This characterizes the Saemisch defense. White builds a solid center and yeah, prepares to develop with moves like bishop e3 and queen d2, and yeah, sometimes start an attack on the king side. Okay, so castling is a normal move here, which is what I recommend for black. And yeah, white has a few possibilities here, but today we're going to look at the move bishop e3. And on bishop e3, the move I recommend to you is c5. And this is in fact a pawn sacrifice. And in this video we're going to look at the variation where white accepts the pawn. So if white accepts the pawn after d takes c5, d takes c5, queen takes d8, rook takes e8 is what he usually does. It's better to exchange the queens because um, if he takes the pawn without exchanging the queens, then we just play knight c6 after bishop takes c5. And the compensation is not so obvious right now, but yeah, black will get some clear play for the pawn, especially on the dark squares with and also with the bishop on the long diagonal. This bishop on g7. So after knight c6, bishop e3, knight d7. Now two moves. For example, rook c1 is met with queen a5, knight h3, and rook d8, putting the rook opposite of the queen and already threatening some knight e5 or knight c5 moves. If instead of rook c1 he plays knight ge2, then we go knight d5, knight f4, and now knight a5, putting pressure on c4. And after queen a4, bishop d7, queen b4, rook c8. Yeah, black has a very comfortable position with pressure on c4 and very active pieces. That's also something to note about this variation, that black always gets very active pieces. So therefore most of the players play queen takes d8, but there's another move to look at here, which is e5. Was played in some high-level games. I don't remember exactly which ones, but after knight fd7, f4, black should immediately strike with f6 to break up these pawns, f4 and e5. And in fact, I don't think this variation is so promising for white. Black can achieve good play after e takes f6, knight takes f6, bishop takes c5, and now bishop f5, just activating all the pieces. After knight f3, knight e4, knight takes, bishop a3, knight c6, bishop e2, knight d4, and after takes, we see these two very powerful bishops across the board, cutting the white king from castling. Also, we have some pressure along the f-file with the rook, so I would say this position is yeah, very comfortable for black. But yeah, if we return to this position, of course, the principled continuation is queen takes d8 here, and then we should take back with the rook. And now bishop takes c5. Then we play knight c6. So this is yeah, actually the starting position, and there's a lot of arrows here on the board, but yeah, it just illustrates some ideas that black has, sorry. It's just to play knight d7, activating the bishop on g7. Gain the tempo on the bishop on c5, and yeah, we get very active play, as you will see now. So in this position, white has in fact four moves that he can try. He can play bishop a3, he can play rook d1, he can play knight d5, or he can play knight ge2. So let's look at rook d1 first. This is not so threatening. Yeah, white is obviously trying to contest the d-file, but yeah, a simple move here for black is just taking. Rook takes d1, and now white can recapture in two ways. If he takes with the knight, then we play knight d7, kicking the bishop, and after bishop a3, a5. The idea of a5 is to play knight b4 and put pressure on the a2 pawn. And if he takes, for example, knight b4, bishop takes, pawn takes, then our rook on a8 is activated. So after after a5, white is already fine because the white rook already left the queen side. So therefore we get some clear play here, and probably we'll get our sacrificed pawn back. So the other move is king takes d1. Then we should play knight knight d7 as well. Bishop a3, and now we give up our dark square bishop in order to destroy his pawn structure. So bishop takes c3, b takes e3, and now knight de5. We're planning to play bishop e6 on the next move, and yeah, if you look at the white's pawn structure on the queen side, it's totally ruined. So yeah, this just indicates that black has clear play here for the sacrificed pawn. Now, if we return to the position, rook d1 is not so challenging. On knight ge2 we play knight d7, and then here white has three moves again. He can play bishop f2, bishop e3, and bishop a3. So let's look at bishop a3 first, then we play knight de5, putting pressure on c4, so therefore knight f4, e6, guarding the d5 square from any knights, rook d1, takes, takes, and now again this a5 motive with planning to go knight b4 on the next move, and this position is very fine for black. If instead of bishop a3 he goes bishop f2, which is a modern move which has been tried lately, then knight d5 again, knight f4, and this time b6. The bishop should be developed on a6 to put pressure on c4, and this guarantees black a pretty good position after bishop e2, bishop a6, attacking the c4 pawn. So knight b5, but now we have a nice move knight b4, threatening knight c2 check, and also preparing rook c8 to put pressure on the c4 pawn, and it's clear that white cannot hold his queen side together here. So for example, castle short, bishop takes b5, c takes b5, rook d2. We already get a rook on the second rank, and yeah, attacking some pieces here. So rook b1, defending b2, bishop h6. There are some loose pieces now, as you can see, because the bishop on e2 is protected by the knight on f4. But now we attack this knight by playing bishop h6. So therefore white should play bishop g3. But then we can already take bishop takes f4, bishop takes f4, rook takes e2, bishop takes e5, and now f6. We hit the bishop and we see that the a2 pawn is hanging as well. So after bishop d4, rook c8, we introduce a second rook to the second rank, and yeah, I would say black is totally fine here. So if we return to the position, if instead of bishop f2 he goes bishop e3, which is a move also which was quite popular, then we go knight d5 again, so that's quite easy to remember. On both bishop f2, bishop a3, and bishop e3 we go knight d5, knight f4, and now knight b4, threatening some knight c2 checks and activating the knights. And now there's yeah, two moves, and to show how dangerous this line is for white, if he plays rook d1, this line is refuted by a nice tactical shot, which is knight f3 check. And yeah, it's nice to catch your opponent with this kind of moves if he doesn't know this position. So after knight f4 and then knight b4, if your opponent plays rook d1, you have the shot knight f3. And the point of this move is after g takes f3, we take this knight on c3 with check, and we see some loose pieces now, because after b takes c3, there's knight c2 check. King e2, and now we take the rook, and now we recapture our piece, And we can see that white's pawn structure on the queen side is totally ruined, and I would say black is already better here. So therefore rook d1 is not possible. King f2 is a better move. Then we play bishop e6. If he takes knight takes e6, f takes e6, this structure is fine for us, as you can see by the arrows. And the d5 square is protected by the pawn as well. So bishop e6 is a strong move. Then knight cd5 is common. Here we take with the bishop. He has two possibilities. If he captures with the c-pawn, then we play rook c8, threatening rook c2. And if he captures with the knight, then we play knight c2, rook c1. We take this dark square bishop, and this in fact was a game from Gelfand, I think. King takes e3 and now e6, and we see that there's a problem on this h6 to c1 diagonal, because after knight c3, bishop h6, white played f4. And black replied with a very strong move here in this position, g5. So we can see that there are some loose pieces on this diagonal, and this g5 move is very powerful. Of course, if let me see for a second. If white captures here, then of course g4 check and winning the rook. So that's not possible. So yeah, on g5. g3 was played, but now already knight g6 and the pawn on f4 is lost. So black is better in that position. So now if we return, that was for the move knight ge2. Now bishop a3 we didn't cover yet, so on the 9th move bishop a3, sorry, the 10th move bishop a3, we should play a5 with the same idea that I mentioned before, is to play knight b4 and get some active play. Because on knight b4, if he takes, then we recapture with the a pawn, and the a file is open for our rook. And when the knight is on b4, it's also threatening knight c2 check. So on a5, white has two moves, rook d1 and knight d5. Let's look at knight d5 first. On knight d5 we capture, and we play knight b4. And castling queenside is the best move, but then already e6. And also the point why black has some compensation in these Saemisch variations where he sacks the pawn is that you can see by these pieces on the king side, which are colored yellow here, that white's development on the king side is totally zero. His bishop, his knight, and his rook are still placed on the first rank, and yeah, black almost all his pieces are in active play. So after castling queenside and e6, I would say that black also is very comfortable and has enough compensation for the sacrifice material in this position. So knight takes e5 is not that good, so the players played almost exclusively rook d8 here. Then bishop e6, knight d5, and now an idea that Alexei Shirov introduced in a game with Vladimir Kramnik is knight b4, sacrificing a second pawn, but for very good compensation. And yeah, Alexei Shirov proved against Kramnik that black is totally fine here. So even in modern games with computer analysis and stuff, yeah, it proves that this variation gives sufficient compensation to black. Because after knight b4, the point is to sacrifice the second pawn with knight takes e7 check. And on knight takes e7 check, king h8. And now the point being that if he returns to d5 with the knight, then we have knight c2 check, king f2 and take on a3. And now this very strong move b5, undermining the control of the d5 square. And after this b5 move, funny enough, black is completely equal. So Kramnik, sensing the danger, played rook takes d8. But after rook takes d8 and yeah, here white has two options. He can take on b4, but it's not so good because after a takes b4 and knight d5, we go rook a8 and attack the pawn on a2. And white's queen side is falling apart here. So instead of bishop takes b4, knight d5, but now knight c2 check again, king f2 and take on a3, and now b5. And now some best play is knight h3, b takes c4, bishop takes c4. This in fact happened in the game. Rook c8, bishop b3, and now a typical strike a4. So after bishop takes a4, there's knight takes d5, takes with the bishop. And we can see here that black is 2 pawns up, but the pawns that he has extra are these double pawns, which black is going to win. So after bishop b3, takes, rook c2 check, king e3, rook c3 check, we already regain one of the pawns. And after rook d1, creating one threat of rook d8, we play simply h6, rook d3, bishop c3. And little by little we are surrounding this pawn on a4. And also attacking on the second rank, so yeah, it's clear that white cannot be better in this position, and in fact the players repeated moves in this position, so this turned out to be a draw. Now if we return to this position where black sacrifices the second pawn, instead of knight takes e7 check, he can also take on b4, but then we take on d1, king takes, and now take on b4, and after bishop takes b4 we have rook takes a2, and black is better here. So instead of knight takes b4, he can also play bishop takes b4. Then again we capture, knight takes, and now knight d7. We see two bishops shooting at the queen side, the bishop on e6 and the bishop on g7, in combination with the rook on a8. And black's knight is ready to jump to c5. And yeah, after rook d2, for example, knight c5, black is already very comfortable here. So yeah, that is for the line with rook d1 and bishop e6. The sheer of idea of sacrificing another pawn, very interesting. So that proves that black is also okay in this variation. And now we come to another variation, and the last variation in fact, which is knight d5, which is also one of the main moves. But now we play knight d7, attacking the pawn on b2. And here is two ways that white can capture on e7. He can play bishop takes, and he can play knight takes. If he plays knight takes, then we take with the knight, bishop takes, and now bishop takes b2. He can choose between rook b1 and bishop takes d8. If he takes on d8, then we take on a1, knight h3, bishop c3 check, king d1, bishop e5, very important to control the f4 square, knight f2, knight b6, and after knight d3, bishop d4, knight c1, knight a4. We already creating some threats on the queen side, and yeah, just planning to develop with bishop e6, and then we have maximum activity for our pieces here. So if instead of taking on d8 he plays rook b1, then we play bishop c3 check. He has two moves here. If he plays king d1, then we play rook e8, king c2, bishop g7, bishop d6, and now knight e5. And white has some black has some plans in combination with knight e6 to d4, and also f5 move can be an idea in combination with some bishop e6 moves, and we can see that yeah, white's pawns on the queen side are totally weak. So if instead of king d1 he goes king f2, then bishop d4 check. King he has two moves here. If he goes king e1, then we go rook e8 followed by f5. And if he goes king g3, then we go rook e8, bishop g5, and knight f6. We can see that the king is cut off by the bishop on d4, and now we create some strong threats like knight h4 check, knight h5 check, sorry. So yeah, that's also quite interesting about this line. And if he takes on e7 with the bishop, then we recapture, knight takes, king f8, knight. Now you can take on c8, but after bishop takes b2, nice intermediate move, rook b1 check, king f2, bishop d4 check, and we take on c8, and after rook takes b7 we have bishop b6 trapping the rook, so this is not possible. So therefore black is fine here. But after king f8 he can play knight d5 as well. Then we take on b2. If rook d1 then knight c5. And if rook b1 then bishop g7 back, and after knight h3, knight c5, knight f2, bishop e6, bishop e2, and rook c8. We again get maximum activity, and after castle short b6, yeah, knight b7 is a very strong move, rerouting to a5 or d6. rook c1, bishop h6. Now if rook c2, then we take on d5, so that's not possible. So therefore rook d1, and now knight a5, rook b4 to protect the pawn, and rook c5. Right, and you can see here that black has in fact sufficient compensation for the pawn. So let's go back. Yeah, I think now we covered all the possible variations. In this position we covered bishop a3, we covered knight d5, we covered knight ge2, and we covered rook d1 as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm going to do another video on the Saemisch variation where white declines this pawn sacrifice on this move, on the 6th move with c5, because white has some alternatives here with knight ge2 and d5, so that's what we're going to look at in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time. Bye.